The Art of Yes. Interview with Shawn Kinley. Hello, Shawn. Shawn Kinley is my guest today, and welcome to Warsaw because welcome back to Warsaw because you've been to Warsaw a few years ago.
Yeah, I love Poland. I like the food, and I think the people are really cool too.
Oh,
I've been there a couple times actually. I remember the first time I was there, I was coaching a circus in a little town, and it was amazing. And there was this recipe I haven't been able to find since, where they use apples with spaghetti.
oh,
You
that's
know that?
yes, because we use a lot of we lose especially for children in old times. We had a lot of like noodles or like pasta with different kind of sweet things on top because we didn't have sweet things in the shops. So our parents were preparing, like cottage cheese with a little bit of sugar or with fruits or with apples, and we have a lot of apples, so it's existing.
Yes. If you find the recipe, you should send me it. I like it a lot.
Okay, deal. Nice to hear. Yeah, I heard that you were teaching circus, so I hope we will go to that. So, how are you, Shawn, in these difficult days or this strange year we have now? Um,
It is a strange year. I think I'm doing really fine, and uh, sometimes again it's hard to say that because I know around the world there are people who are having such a hard time. And when all this first happened, I put on one of my websites that I'm going to teach all my classes for free because it's I think we have to be in this together. For me to say, oh, I'm going to try to earn a lot of money, I'm going to try to keep my rates the same way, that's absurd. So I think we all have to struggle together. It's like the stupid banks and places who say we're in this together, but still they charge the same rates and they make it difficult for everyone. So at least the improvisers, I think, should be a little bit more sensitive to each other. So
mhm.
I'm doing fine actually, and like I said earlier, I really love the idea that we're being forced to adapt and use improvisations in a major life way to change how we present ourselves, how we perform, how we can make sense of the Zoom reality.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of good things that are coming out of it, and hopefully we don't lose the good things when the pandemic is gone.
Yeah. You coming from, you live in Calgary, but you are not in Calgary.
No, I'm in Germany.
So you are very close to me in the end. We could find each other by meeting by like train or travel or just meeting almost immediately.
Yeah, I could just walk out the door and I'm sure I'd find you.
Yeah. So what are you doing in Germany?
Well, a couple things. There's a few things that I've lined up for teaching and meeting a significant other who we haven't seen each other in 7 months, and she lives here in Germany. So we'll see how that goes. It's having long distance relationships suck, and most performers and teachers who are doing this international travel, they're all in the same boat, having difficult times with the relationships, and the pandemic doesn't make it easier.
Yeah.
So part of it.
Wow. So how long will you stay?
This is a very short trip for me. I'm only here for about a month, and usually my trips are about 3 months each,
Mhm.
and I do about three of those a year. Not just to Europe, but like Asia and South America.
Mhm. So we will come back to your travels because I know you're traveling a lot and you've been like to over 50 countries to teach or something like that. So it's a
Yeah.
lot. It's a lot to talk and it's a lot of your experience. But until we will get there, that's my main thing I ask usually my interviewers is the beginning of improv or the beginning of this meeting with this art form, and as I had a lot of American guests, they usually they started in the schools or sometimes with the theater stuff. So they were most of the time connected to theater or theater games, mostly developed by Viola, but also later in different ways. Uh, you're from Canada, and it's a bit different, I think, in general, because you are a Johnstonian student.
Well, I kind of came into it from a side area. I was a physical performer, so I was doing a lot of mime and mask work and traveling around the world. At the time, I was quite young when I was doing that, and I just brought improvisation into the work I would do. I'd be making up things that weren't in my scripts and structures, and it was my own style at that point. And in Calgary, as many people know, Keith Johnstone has lived for, I think, 40, 50 years now. And he's a grandfather of improvisation. I didn't know that at the time. I just went down to the Loose Moose Theatre and watched the shows and watched this old British guy stumbling around on stage, saying these amazingly odd things, but fantastic to watch him. And then I got involved with the theater basically because there was a pretty girl on stage, and I went, oh, I want to be involved in this theater company. And so her name was Shelley. Shelley left quite early after I showed up. Hopefully it wasn't because of me. And then I stuck around for probably about 35 years, and yeah, worked with Keith for a long time. A lot of people jump in immediately and say, oh, Shawn is a disciple of Keith. Shawn teaches Keith's work. But I really think that the best improvisers are the ones who can take from Viola's Poland, from Keith, from clown work in South America, who can take from all different areas and mix them together. Because there's too many people who say this style is good and this style is bad. And that's not true at all. I think things are getting better. I don't think so many people are saying Chicago only or Johnstonian only. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, I don't know many of you Johnstonians. I know Patty Stiles, and I never met Rebecca, but I know her, and these few people which you work now with the naked improvisers, which we will talk later. But I recognized your name in the Keith Johnstone book somewhere where he mentioned you.
You really have to look for it because he puts my name in and he actually spells it wrong. And like, even if he knew you for 10 or 15 years, he's always getting your name wrong. But yeah, it's nice being in his book.
So tell me, how was your beginning in the theater? Because when I talked to Patty, she said like she was just involved in like doing small things, not even playing at the beginning. She was intern in the theater, so she did like, you know, the managing stuff, selling tickets and being around, and then slowly getting into improvisation step by step. So how was that for you?
Well, the thing I liked about Loose Moose Theatre at the beginning is that it was a community. And so, like you said with Patty, you take the tickets, you get free classes, you help build props and costumes. I didn't come in really directly. After I saw this girl, she was performing in a late night comedy show that's written. It was all sketch comedy. So that was the first thing I got involved with. And I was a writer. So I would write material for the late night shows. And then I was a performer in the late night shows. And then they knew I did physical work, mime work, and they needed someone for a kids show. So they put me into that. So none of this stuff was really improvisation. And then, slowly my style, because it was physical, very different from most people's there, people started to draw me into the improvised shows, the formats that Keith does, the theater sports and that kind of stuff. And it was just slowly just being absorbed in the company.
Wow. Yeah. So do you remember your first improv lesson course, the first experience?
Well, that's the weird thing again, because I was just learning it as I went along in the streets when I was doing street performing. Uh, I remember really brilliant moments where I'd be performing, and in the middle of my act, a dog would come up, and my brain would go, use it. And so I'd play with the dog, use the dog in the act, and it was brilliant. And all my brain could think of was, how can I get another dog to come into my scene and do that again? And of course you can't. So I have a hard time remembering the early lessons at Loose Moose because I was always already doing some of the things.
Mm-hmm.
I remember Keith teaching classes, actually directing. I was in a show that he was directing, and he was a brilliant director. He could see what you were doing. He could say things that would change a performer immediately. He could do it in improvisation scenes in a way that nobody else could. And then in directed full-length plays, I remember doing The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, and he had me doing things that I'd never done as an actor, and I was always amazed, and really amazed by the simplicity of what he did too, obvious kind of stuff. So that was my reminder, or my first feeling of his lessons, of any lessons in improvisation that I do remember. I remember as I was growing, almost all improvisers go through this phase where they first start wide-eyed and everything's possible, they take risks, and then they start getting into, they know some rules, but they're not improving, and they get frustrated, and they sit at the back of the room with their arms crossed like this. And I was going through that phase. I remember watching Keith teaching and thinking, what the fuck? He said the opposite thing last week. I'm so pissed off. And in that moment, I realized one of the most important lessons in improvisation, that everything is a paradox, that what is right now may not be right in the next scene or in the next lesson. And that's what so many improvisers are missing, like going into a class and having people say, what's the rule? How do I do it correctly? I make fun of Germans when I'm in their classes, and I apologize every time, but there's a mentality in Germany of, get the rule. What's the rule? How do I do it right? Generally. Yeah.
True. So yeah, I wanted to ask you, because this beginning, what were your difficult moments in this phase where you struggle with something, and how you got over it?
Well, you always look back at what you've been through, and you don't see it with as much perspective as other people. Someone comes up to you and says, you were such a jerk then, or you were so arrogant then. And you're going, oh, was I? But I know my ego gets in the way. Like, I think all of us, that you think you're better than you are, or there's a lot of teachers who are teaching way before they should, because you initially feel, I can improvise and I can make people laugh. I'm really good. I'm going to teach a class. And if you're teaching beginners, all the basic stuff you teach will make people's eyes open wide, and you start feeling like you're the god of improvisation. Then you start falling into bad traps because you don't have experience, or you don't have a good theoretical understanding that really all of these rules you're teaching, that's not improvisation. And so then you get the frustrated teachers. So I think as a teacher in improvisation, I got frustrated probably really late, maybe 15 years into improvisation teaching, because I start to see kind of holes in my behavior. I was starting to do scripts. Here's the thing you do. People are laughing. I'm a good teacher, but that's not what we should be doing. So I had to consciously force myself to give up what was easy, give up what was, everybody was saying, oh, teach us this thing again, and say, no, that's not important. What's important is if I can figure out what you are and who you are and what you need. So that was a really defining point in my teaching. And I think I was a better teacher as a kid when I was younger, because a good teacher will admit when they don't know something. I was teaching at the university actually when I was 18, I think, Keith brought me in to teach a class. And one of the students asked me, what about this? What about that? I go, that's interesting. I have no idea. Why don't we explore it? And so in that innocent state, not my ego wasn't involved, and I didn't say, oh, I'll fake it. They became involved in the learning. I realized how easy it was to teach as long as I had the students asking questions and not always just giving them answers.
Mhm.
And then the students start to evolve these answers and techniques, and I learned from them. So that was, for me, a really big process. And I started actually reading a lot of Eastern philosophies. There's a really great philosophy about Tibet culture in Tibet, where the master stands on top of the hill and all the students are down below and they teach in this direction. But at any point, one of the students can stand up and say, master, what about this idea? And the master, without ego, will go, that's a good idea. And they change places. And everybody looks at this person as the new master, and then they keep changing. So the focus is on the education and on the exploration, not on the end point or on the teacher itself. So that's something that's embedded itself in my theory and my desire when I teach. So, and to finish your question, in performing, I think some of the stumbling blocks came in when I had success. There's a type of performer of which I am, where if you have success, you will protect that success. That's how I was. So you do something good and strong, and then you try to keep repeating it. And each time you do, it's not as good as it was before. So that was something I really had to learn, is stop trying to protect your success. Or you're doing a scene on stage, and I've seen a lot of people do this. It's going well, and you have a fear of success. It's going well, it's going great, and all of a sudden you're going, I can't handle this. I don't think I can do any better. And you start waving down the lights in the middle of a scene instead of just going, be calm. If you fail, relax. So learning how to really fail, I think, was one of the important lessons.
Yeah, I think it's very big part of Keith teaching. And I feel it from your teaching and from Patty's, and and from books of Keith, of course. So coming back to,
I just want to say, I just want to throw another one out about the failure thing. There's so many people around the world in improvisation who say failure is good. Oh, we should enjoy failure. But that's bullshit. It really is. I mean, failure hurts. Failure is hard. Failure is difficult. So I wanted to make sure that people kind of reframe their thinking and don't just say failure is good because you're supposed to say it. We know failure is difficult, but if we can find a way to reform our relationship and say there's opportunities in the failure, then I think we might have something more healthy instead of this kind of fake, false, failure is good things that everybody just says. We shouldn't repeat things that people are saying. I think we should really explore it and see what we truly feel and be honest about it.
So what was your failure, or how did you learn on, or what was the thing which happened and taught you something?
Every day teaches me something. Like, I mean, I could go through a long list of them. I'll start with one that I was just talking about recently. I was teaching a class recently in Japan, and we were talking about things. They brought up some information that was not Japanese. It was a very American attitude about improvisation. And I said, be very careful because you're Japanese and your culture is different, and you can't get stuck in the idea of some communities overpowering this community of improvisation. You got to find out what's true for you. I learned that from a Japanese girl 20 years ago when I was in Osaka at a university, and I was teaching a class, and it was a lot of the yes and mentality, very be enthusiastic. And at one point she stopped and she says, I'm not American. Don't make me do this. And my brain went, of course, this is so aggressive and wrong to hit her from the side and say, do it this way because this is the right way. And so since then, being sensitive to the cultures that I go in and say, what is Japanese improvisation? What's German improvisation? What's truly your improvisation? Because around the world, whose line is it anyway is the main influence that has brought improvisation into most cultures. Then you have Chicago style, you have Keith Johnstone style, you have the styles that if people first see it, they go, that's improvisation and that's what I'll do. And that shouldn't be. One example I give about this is talking about Felipe Ortiz. You know Felipe?
Yeah.
So I met Felipe and his former partner, Beto, can't remember how long ago now, in Norway. And they told me how they got started. They were in school in physical comedy and acrobatics. And they said they just kind of saw some improvisation online and they thought, oh, this looks fun. And they started to explore it for a year or 2 years. And after a while, they taught themselves everything they could teach themselves. And they were doing stuff that they really enjoyed. And then they said, well, okay, now let's start reading a book and we'll find out other styles. And they start reading this one book and they went, this guy has stolen all of our ideas. Everything we've discovered ourselves is in here. It was Keith Johnstone's. So they naturally found what was true to them in their culture and it was overlapping Keith Johnstone's ideas, but they also found their own style that was true from Colombian style of improvisation. So I think that's why, especially watching Felipe, you see a very sharp, unique style that's not just Spolin or Johnstone. And that's again, one of the things that I learned from Felipe, from his idea. So it's, the Japanese girl taught me that. Felipe taught me a little bit. A 6-year-old child taught me something. That every time I go into a class, I tell them, whether they're 5 years old or 50 years old, if I don't leave this class having learned something, it's not a good class. So I put the pressure on them that I have to learn something. And the exercise was, you put out one finger. I'm not sure if you've done this, and you put up one thumb.
Yeah,
and then you switch. And so you do that back and forth. And almost everybody has a hard time doing it. So this one little kid was sitting at the front of the class because he was the bad student. The teacher was angry with him because he was always talking in class and misbehaving. And I said, well, let's see if he can do this. And so everybody started doing it and struggling, but good students, because they were all quietly struggling with their faces like this. So the teacher thought they're doing good work. And the child up at the front, who was the misbehaving child, was just sitting there looking at his fingers and moving around and making sounds. And then eventually he touched his thumb and his finger and he says, this is easy. And I said, well, I don't understand. You're just touching your thumb. He goes, if I touch my thumb, I know where it is. There's my thumb. There's my thumb. That's my thumb. And he started doing the exercise really fast in a way that I hadn't taught him. And at that point, that little teacher taught me, you got to figure out the lesson for the individual. How can you make them learn it? Because if they're failing and having a hard time, you may feel arrogant and strong as a teacher going, oh, I'm so smart because I can do something they can't. But what you should tell them is, if you can't get it, you should blame me. I should apologize because I'm the one who failed you not being able to get the exercise. And I need to encourage you to find your own way. So lessons are everywhere. And I think it's not just from the masters, but from a 6-year-old kid and 90-year-old woman, anything.
I ask because it's very close to another question. Like, what was your maybe biggest or one of the most important improv epiphanies? What was your discovery? Especially in this nice early times, maybe learning and discover something which gave you a big step forward with understanding what improv is, but can be also from nowadays.
I think about every 3 years I go through that. Every 3 years something hits me. I go, I now understand it in a different way. I used to think now I understand it, but then I start realizing, in a different way, and it's going to keep happening. The last one, I think that was really important to me, was about the death of improvisation. To recognize that improvisation dies when you define it too finitely, too small, and say improvisation is this. And then it starts becoming cold, and it may look professional and slick, but it's not improvisation. And so I started to research that a bit, and I went through history, and I found 3 times where improvisation existed in our culture. Everybody knows Commedia dell'arte, of course. And then the time before that, most people don't know, is the Oscan Games, I think was called. And this was in Rome, somewhere in Rome, the old Rome area. And at that time, what happened was the area was taken over, but the leaders looked at what they were doing and said, you're doing some good work in this theater, which was improvisation at the time. We want you to write down the stories that you're doing so that you can keep doing them. And by formalizing it, saying, this is what you're doing, it stopped being improvisation. And those scripts became all that was left of that work. And the same thing happened with Commedia dell'arte, when I think it was three of the great Commedia dell'arte artists wrote down the ideas of how to do it properly. And all of a sudden, everyone's trying to do it that way. And you have a style that's no longer improvisation. Then you look at what's happening now. And like we said earlier, you find some of those people who are saying, here's the answer, here's the right way. Here's my school of improvisation. Do it this way, you'll be great. And we see improvisation dying in a lot of places. So that's one of the latest realizations.
Interesting. Okay, so tell me, how was your Lusmus experience? Did you play there? Because there was sketch, and there was theater, and improv. So did you do all of that, I guess?
Yeah, Keith's, one misunderstanding of Keith, I think, is that this mentality that comes, I think, from the Chicago world. I've read it a few times in some of the Chicago style books, of short form. So the idea that short form is quick, clever, funny is a big mistake. Keith Johnstone's styles are almost always short form: maestro, guerrilla, theater sports, short scenes. But his main push was always on variation. Can you make a scene that people cry? The next scene has political commentary. The next scene offend the audience. The next one is just light comedy with no real depth to it. And in a show with that kind of variety, it's you definitely want to come back. You hit so many marks of the human emotional palette that it's fantastic. So that was something that I was drawn into, because you could do Waiting for Godot, and this is from a man who worked with Beckett, and Beckett said that Keith Johnstone was the best director of Waiting for Godot, which amazes me. So you could do the classical theater. I didn't do too much of that. I wasn't a big fan of Beckett or that kind of stuff. I did like Edgar Allan Poe, so I got into that kind of theory. I did all the late night comedy shows, so lots of writing, which I really loved, and I think is good for an improviser. Along with a guy named Tonko Lamb, we developed sonography backstage, which a lot of people think is just moving props on stage, but it's more than that. It's looking ahead into the scene and trying to figure out what might be necessary so you can create an environment that supports the improvisers. And by doing the backstage work, I think I learned a lot about how to be a supportive improviser and a visual improviser. So there's that. I went into mask work because I'd been doing mask work for a while. So I was using mask on stage, and Keith has his own style. And again, this is where Keith and I differ a lot. He does trance style, and I really just fuck around with it until I find the character really embedded in myself. And so it's a different style. Never did musical theater. It wasn't my thing. Mine was mime, so it's silent, no music for me. Kid shows were a massive part of Loose Moose Theater. And almost every improviser who went to Loose Moose went through the kid show programs. And I encourage everybody to do it. If you haven't done kid show work, at least 4 or 5 shows, you're probably not the improviser you could be. When you get on stage in front of children and you're performing and you're coming up with clever adult tricks and trying to say, look at how quick I am to solve this problem as an improviser, the kids do not care. They live improvisation. They're the experts and we're just in their territory. So what they want is a good story. They teach you to be a good storyteller. And as soon as you're not, you hear them saying, Mom, I want to go home. Mom, this is boring. They're so truthful. And so I did a lot of that, and that was very useful. Then I moved into directing, and that was fantastic. And again, people should get into directing, even if you don't want to, because you start to think in a different process. You start to understanding the images and how people are seeing the shows, and not just from your own personal point of view. And from the directing, creating formats, a lot of that. With Loose Moose, I was involved in the development of two of the big formats, which was Maestro and Gorilla. And Gorilla was originally called Theme and Forfeit and the All-Star Show. But these formats, again, watching and being part of the development, it was fantastic because you could see Keith's brains work and see that he's not just taking an idea and saying, let's make a good show. He's taking an idea, trying to make a good arc of a show, trying to look at the performers and saying, where are their weaknesses and how can I use that in the show and how can I develop their skills based on the format I'm creating. And a lot of people don't see that. They're just trying to come up with another clever idea, but you have to take a look at who you have in your show and are you trying to help them? Loose Moose was considered a education center. At one point, there were a lot of the senior improvisers who said, let's make this a professional thing and let's make sure everybody gets paid. And Keith and at the time, Dennis Cahill, the new artistic director, they both said, no, it's the education that's more important. If you want to become the greatest performer in the world, go to Toronto, Vancouver, the States, or wherever. And we kept focusing on the education. And so that's why the formats, for some people, are a little bit teachy. You have a director, you have games and exercises that are working on skills as opposed to just entertainment. So that's kind of my playing around at the theater. At one point, I was involved also in making crazy props. I was kind of a weird production person. And I would make things like a big hand with movable fingers that you could rip people off stage with. Naked suits so you could be naked on stage and not be too embarrassed. So
that's cool. I didn't hear about that, so it's nice to hear it now. Shawn, so what's the you mentioned supportive improviser. What is for you supportive? Who is for you a supportive improviser, and what kind of features or abilities they have?
Support is, again, a flexible thing. Sometimes support means you see someone hesitating on stage like this, their eyes are getting wide, their eyebrows are coming in, and you see the tension, and you're there immediately to take the tension off, to allow them to breathe easier. But I think, again, a lot of people miss the idea that support isn't just about taking care in that way. Taking care of an improviser who is free and having a good time on stage means pushing them close to the edge of the cliff and pushing them off occasionally so they're going, fuck, I've never done this before, and making their heart rate rise. And that there's a fine line. It's like some people push their partners and then they raise their hands and say, whatever happens, happens. And then the partner fails and they go, it was fun up until that point. So it crosses the line into bullying. I can push you until you can't save yourself. Oh, I'm so great, but that's not it. So I think the supportive improvisers are the ones who can see you, really see you, and say, do I need to catch you or do I need to push you? And keep all that in balance. Yeah. I think in the world of improvisation, of who I work with, people like, Nadine, of course, in Germany is very supportive. Felipe is, I haven't worked much with Joe Bill, but I think Joe Bill is. I
Mm-hmm.
think he's a very nice guy. Yeah, I think people like that. I mean, generally, there are people who have the personality off stage that you go, I want to hang out with this person.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
So, do you remember your first meeting with Keith? Like the first experience?
Not really. I mean, oddly enough, my first class connected to Loose Moose, I think I was in high school going to a festival at the university. And I think I took a class with Ingrid, who was Keith Johnstone's ex-wife.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I don't know if too many other people have ever taken a class with her. And it wasn't a great class, but it was really interesting later on finding out that this was the woman that Keith was married to. Um, but no, I don't really remember the first time I met Keith, except just seeing him on stage and thinking, why did they let this guy into the theater? He would almost always wear this big, heavy coat and say things like, I can't breathe. Is there any air in this place? Well, I don't know what we're going to do. And so he really looked like this weird homeless guy. And later on, finding out that this was his behavior to drop everybody's expectations down, because most people coming in with notebooks going, this is Keith Johnstone, what are you going to say next? And you can't teach someone like that. So if he's wandering around bumping into walls and saying, would you like a chocolate? You're going, okay, whatever. And then he does his brilliant work.
Mm-hmm.
So I just remember those general kind of impressions.
Mm-hmm. I saw in the other interview with you, which is online, that you can do a really good impression of Keith Johnstone.
I think anybody who's worked with Keith does an impression of Keith. And we all have these really same kind of things. Like we do this kind of thing. Yeah. And most of us would never want Keith to see it. But as soon as you see someone start to do a Keith Johnstone, back guys, back, let's do it again. We all start laughing because we know what it is. There's a really funny one that Dennis Cahill does, and I always try to get him to do it, but he's really reluctant. It's Keith Johnstone doing Rod Stewart singing Do You Think I'm Sexy? So this is me doing Dennis, doing Keith, doing Rod Stewart. Do you think I'm sexy? Come on, guys, tell me. And he goes on like that. So, yeah.
That's funny. Do you think impressions, because you're miming, do you think impressions and copying people helps improvisers?
Oh, yeah. So I love psychology and I like how the brain works. Do you know about mirror neurons?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So we do this all the time. We're constantly mirroring the people that we connect with.
Yeah.
And for everybody who does speaking one voice, or what Viola Spolin calls following the follower, you watch an audience member watching you with someone else going, my name is, and you look in the audience and you see all the lips going. So we follow each other all the time when we're connected. So on the other side of things, if you watch someone and you can try to take on their personality, you might get a little bit of understanding of who they are. Mm-hmm. As a director, this is another kind of realization that I made a few years ago. I start to recognize that I was really trying to make myself the person I was watching on stage. I'd be directing a show and someone would be on stage and they'd be doing something and I'd be in the director's chair going like this, and it helped my brain think like they were. And I'm going, this isn't right. There's something wrong. Oh, I know. They're feeling tension. And so I could give them a direction that would break down what was going on. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of this came from my mime physical background. It always seemed really obvious that the body infects what the brain feels. If you go like this, you can't help but feel anxious, angry, or something else. It's just squeezing my hands makes my eyebrows want to come down. So our bodies tell us so much. And so why not reflect what others do, and you might discover something about them. And it's fun.
Mhm. So what in general your miming, coming back to what you just said, what this gave you in improvisation? You said physicality, but also
Sorry, what was the question? What?
miming, to do
Yeah.
miming, as you studied miming. What this gave you in improvisation?
Uh, so again, so many different things. There's one thing that most people don't think about with mime, uh, called characterizations, object characterizations or physical characterizations. So to be able to take on shapes of objects, or to have telephones and make the shape of your body into the thing that you want to use, that was always really useful when on stage. People would say, "I'm not good with space work." I always hated the word space work. You're doing mime, you're doing physical work. So when people had a hard time with doing mime on stage, I I was always thinking, well, just let your body become the object of the thing that you're doing. Some people say, don't do this as a gun. Why not? This in mime, this is perfectly good. It's a physical characterization of a gun. They want you to hold a gun like this because the real gun is here and your finger's on the trigger. But the audience sees this and they fully understand it. Um, I remember early on, a lot of the directors, when I was on stage, would try to get me to do mime because they thought it would be more clear for the audience. But there's something like doing a mime walk. It really looks like a mime doing a physical technique. Instead, I think people should be on stage and just let their body go like this and stand in the spot and move their feet back and forth. You don't have to do good technical mime. You just have to do things that the audience goes, I know what you're talking about. Don't let the technique get into the way of the storytelling.
Mhm.
If they're watching and saying, oh, I can see the wall there, then you're not doing good work. If they can go, how's he going to get out? Then you're doing good work.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's one thing that it gave me, is the characterization stuff. It gave me uh, abstract, a little bit more abstract kind of reasoning. There's something called ban mime, which is really beautiful, changing perspectives really quickly. So if you're walking along, you switch perspective to tiny perspective, and then you switch to the close-up of an eye if you have like the shape like this and your eyeball moving back and forth. So I did that a lot on stage. I remember it once, like with scenography, someone was walking downstairs. There's a chair on stage, and most people would take the chair and go backstage and just get rid of the chair so the person can mime walking downstairs. But what makes sense is if you're walking downstairs, from your perspective, that chair is now above you. So I would pick up the chair and slowly raise it above the person and move it back as they're walking one spot. And so it would look like they were going beneath the chair. So that's one of the strong things it gave me in mime, is a perspective on physical relations on stage that we sometimes miss. We often almost always take it from our point of view. The world must look like this through my eyes. But in mime, you step back a lot and you say, how does the rest of the world see it? And how does the world change around this one person?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see now a lot of connection with Felipe, because I interviewed him like 2 or 3 episodes back, and we talked also about this small things and small perspective, like perspective of miming.
Yeah, I think that's why I like Felipe a lot, is our worlds overlap in that place. And there's so few people in improvisation that have that. I think singing has become way more dominant than the physical work that we do. And I think there's a bit of a danger in that. Just to jump into that for a second, I I see a lot of shows where people will structure it so they have a song just before they go to intermission, or a song at the very end of the show. And that trick is covering the fact that they're having a hard time creating emotion on stage. We all know that if someone sings a song, it starts to feel emotional and we feel connected to it and feels happy. but a good improviser should be able to do that with a scene work. We should be screaming out loud, passionately, because we've invested in the character. So no matter what you do, there's always a negative side, and I'm feeling that's happening with the way people are using music on stage. I'm not against music. I just think be really clear why you're using it, not as a trap or something to fix something you can't solve.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing could have happened with physical work. If everybody in the world was doing physical work, I think it would be a problem too. It's got to be in balance. If you go to South America, you see much better physical work in their culture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So coming still back to Keith's work, there is a lot of narrative thing, which also people do not know, that narrative, it's such a strong thing in his work. So what is your approach to this, and how did you learn that? Because I know also, you know, a lot of people will say that doing narrative or narrative stories, it's difficult, or it makes us to be in the head, or you know, different opinions. So how was that for you, this experience? How did you learn? And I guess the writing thing helped you a lot, but did you play like the whole plays, which narrative improvised plays, and how did you develop that skills?
Well, yeah, it's a really big topic, the whole narrative. Well, first of all, remind me to go back to the difference between narrative and narration, which you see a lot. With narrative, it's another skill. If people learn narrative skills, then you're never in your head. It reminds me a little bit of Confucius teaching in China. Confucius is very divided into, you do this in a specific way, you do that in a specific way, you learn this poem, you do this, and you're fully in your head for years and years and years, and all of a sudden it's you're just developing you as a personality in a certain way. And so narrative for some people has to be developed in a very controlled kind of way, and then you become it. It just takes time and practice. But I don't think it's true that it puts people in their head all the time, because we are naturally narrative creatures. I was writing about this today, that back in the caveman days, you're trying to get home and you're with your friend Grog, and Grog says, around the corner, a tiger. And you hide behind one of the caves and you're going, what are we going to do? The storytelling brain saves you. You're saying, if you and I both go this direction, one will get the tiger and the other one can run. But we'll be killed. Oh, okay, not good idea, tragedy. So then you come up with other ideas. So from early days, story has been how we survive. If you walk down the street and you hear a noise in a dark alley, you don't go down that street because your storytelling brain has just clicked in, there's danger down there. So storytelling is much, much easier. And that's what Keith was always trying to push people towards, is the simple question from one of his exercises: what comes next? You do the scene, you ask, what comes first? Someone says, get your birthday present. It's obvious. Your brain doesn't have to intellectually think, what comes next? Open it, of course. And you do the obvious thing. What comes next? Take out the ball. What comes next? Obvious. Bounce it. Try it out. So if you do the obvious, there's no difficulty at all with narrative, I think. The schools teach narrative wrong, and I think that's where some people start getting it into their brains. To say that you got to have a conflict right away kills narrative, because you're saying, hi, how you doing? I've got cancer and I am an angry person. It's like you're trying so hard to make up ideas. You've got something negative coming out and nobody cares about that person. So then Keith starts putting on details to help get past the defense mechanisms. We're so scared, we want to survive. We do everything wrong that we normally do right on stage. So he'll say things like, no story for the first 3 minutes. He calls it nothing, 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 something. And when you do that, it's like clowns on stage having a good time. And then he says, now listen to what you just did in the scene. Listen to that detail, that detail, that detail. Does it tell you what the story is about now? It does. There's latent ideas that kind of creep into the scene. Once upon a time, there was a man with an old book, and he was looking at his old watch, and the leaves were falling down from the autumn tree. As I tell that story, the latent idea is time and aging. And so, of course, it's got to be an old man, and this is probably his last day on earth, or he reads the last page of the book, and it tells something that changes his life forever, just as he passes away. So storytelling is actually a very natural thing. Society tells us, like traditional school tells us how not to do it properly.
Mm-hmm.
The pressure in society tells us we have to entertain, and so we don't do it properly. And where Keith is saying narrative, he's also saying, let's see if we can just get you past your defense mechanisms just to make you a normal human being who tells a normal story. Every audience member who watches a show watches it and goes, I know what they should do. The story becomes very natural and easy to them, as opposed to the people on stage who are coming up with these weird, bizarre things going, I'm a great improviser because I just made bananas come out of my nose. Oh, I'm so spontaneous. But that's not the story the audience wants. Mm-hmm. They know the banana is peeled, that the monkey takes the banana away from you because monkeys like bananas. It's obvious. So that's my take on narrative, and so many people around the world misunderstand, I think, Keith's approach, that it's an intellectual difficult thing, whereas really it's a very simple thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
the difference
and narrative.
Yeah. I'm critical right now in some of my work about some of the Johnstonian improvisers who are really forcing themselves, tell a good story. And by putting that pressure on, they're not telling good stories. They're getting in the way of that natural behavior again. And they fix, a lot of people try to fix that problem by using narration. So instead of, a man goes into the office and the boss fires him. And the man then says, but you can't do that because I have a child who's 4 years old. And then he starts telling the story, and we're intellectually trying to enjoy it, but it makes no sense. It's not an emotional story. So that's narration. And David Mamet is always saying in movies and things, if you're narrating the story, it's not a good story. You've got to show it. Show, don't tell. Mm-hmm. And so the better story would be you go in, the boss fires you, you show emotion, you feel emotion. So now the audience gets to work a little bit and go, something's wrong. You reach inside your wallet or inside your coat for your wallet, but the audience doesn't know that. They're still telling stories in their brain going, what's he going to pull out? You pull out your wallet. The audience goes, why? Their storytelling brain is working. You open up the wallet. You pull out your child's picture. You kiss it. You put it on the desk. You walk over to the window. You open it up and you go out onto the ledge. Now the audience is interested because it's narrative, moving the story forward, not narration, telling you what you should think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a great explanation. You mentioned again something I wanted to talk about, human defense mechanism. It's also Keith's work is based on that. How you would define and what are the mechanisms we have? And if you had something, what were your mechanisms?
Yeah, we're all the same. It's back to that. It's back to that caveman thinking. We want to be safe, and we bring that safety that has protected us for thousands and thousands of years. But then we bring that on stage, and instead of that tiger around the corner, we think that all of the tigers are in the audience. Every audience member wants to kill us. That's part of our brain thinking, I've got to survive here, and we're going to do everything to accomplish that. one thing we do to survive is we run away from danger. So one of my first experiences on stage was with one of my heroes. Her name was Jan Derbyshire. She was a fantastic improviser, and she asked me to be on her team, just me and her. And I was this young improviser going, but we were doing a scene, and at some point, I just ran off stage. And later on, she said, "Oh, that was an inspired choice. That really was fun." But I know in my head that was pure defense mechanism. I was running away from the tigers. So that's one thing. We run away. Uh, we you can actually explain two of the main ones through Keith's two basic ideas: blocking and wimping.
Mhm.
Blocking an idea, saying no to someone, is I will not be controlled by you. Uh, you want to go up the mountain? No, why don't we go into the cave instead? It's just a control mechanism so that you don't have to go into someone else's danger. You can control it. And it becomes so stupid under any little bit of pressure. You don't see what you're doing. And someone says, "Do you want coffee?" And you go, "No." "Do you have any tea?" It doesn't make any difference, coffee or tea, but you're controlling it. So there's that. The next one that I really like to look at a lot is Keith's approach to wimping. And wimping is just not defining. You see it in kids when you say, they come home and you say, "What'd you learn in school?" They go, "I don't know, nothing." They won't say what they've learned. They don't define things. You ask a friend, "What movie do you want to go see?" They go, "Well, I don't know. What do you want to see?" They probably do know what they want to see, but if you define things, you put yourself at risk, and someone could say, "Oh, that's a stupid idea," and you feel hurt by it. So we don't define things. Uh, and what's interesting for me is you go into different cultures and you see more of certain mechanisms than other. Uh, for example, in Japan, I know when I go there, I don't have to teach so much about blocking because in their culture, everything is accept someone else. Don't make anybody look bad. As a teacher, I have to watch out for that because I say, "Do you understand?" And they go, "Hi, hi, yes, 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 everything." Even though you're knowing they didn't understand, but they don't want me to feel bad by saying no. So
Mhm.
you don't have to teach them about saying yes. You have to teach them about defining, because if they define something in their own way, it might not be the way that your partner wants. And so they're more likely, like saying, "What's this?" They go, "Oh, that's it's a good thing. It's and they will just keep going around the edges of it. I have that experience a lot when I go to Japan in the streets, asking, "Is this the direction to Shinkansen?" And they go, "It's a good thing to want to go to the Shinkansen. Why?" And no definition. But my students know this, the Japanese students know this, and we all laugh about it in the same way that the Germans laugh about the rule, rigid, it must be this way, that way. So there's some of the personal defense mechanisms, but we also see it enlarged in the culture. So figure out where you are. Are you in Poland, France, Canada? You all have certain defense mechanisms. Canadians, just to point the finger at me a little bit, Canadians are a little bit too iffy. They sit on the fence a lot. They won't be very strong, a little bit Japanese in a way. Yeah. Personal, if you want to look at some more personal ones, originally there was that one of running off stage. And that comes from the fear of, I can't do this, so I'll just escape, the fight or flight tendency. And mine is more flight. There's the other one, like if you're playing the gift giving game, you give your partner a gift and they take and say, "Oh, thanks for the hamburger." I recognize, like most people do, that I start to associate ideas. After the hamburger, my next one would be, "Oh, thanks for the ice cream." "Oh, thanks for the hot dog." It's all food. But here's the thing for most people, when you recognize your defense mechanism, you're really on a good stage. Uh, you see it, don't criticize yourself. As soon as you say, "Oh, I'm horrible," now you've got two problems to deal with: the first defense mechanism and the negative feeling you have towards yourself about it. And that makes it really difficult. So see it, do it a couple more times. Another piece of food. "Oh, thanks for the sandwich." And then the next time say, I'll consciously try to break it this time. Thanks for the flower. Ah, okay. Thanks for now I don't want to have something up to my face. Thanks for the kite. Oh, good.
Mhm.
So it's self-awareness, self-development. It takes a long time because you're dealing with thousands and thousands of years of pressure for you to survive. And that's really all we're doing in improvisation, is trying to peel away all of that stuff so that we can just be free and fly without restriction.
And that's what you said now. It comes to me, also work with Patty and changing the patterns. And it sounds for me also very Johnstonian thing.
I'm just going to pour some juice.
Okay, okay. As well.
Even if it was streamed, I think it would be fun to say, hey, I'm going to get some juice and walk off the screen and leave you going, whoa. That's one of the problems with improvisation again, is we're so, I think, a little bit scared to show the rough edges of things. And improvisation is rough edges. And that's maybe going into the naked improviser thing. That was our focus, is stop trying to be polished performers and start being improvisers. And after each scene, we take 60 seconds or so to go through all of the rough edges in the scene and say, this is where I think we failed. This is maybe where we got it right. And I think that's more useful than this fake idea after every scene of people going, that was very good. Yes, it was. And seeing the fake look in some people's eyes going, they don't believe it. They didn't like that scene at all, but they're just doing the yes and thing to a fault. So
let's talk about that project, because this is I don't know if this existed before Zoom online thing, or it's just made up now, but whose idea it was? Because Naked Improvisers, this is a project where is few students of Keith involved in. So if you could tell me and explain who made the idea, how old is it, and what is it about?
Well, a fellow named Jeff from Vancouver,
Mm-hmm.
he got a grant and he wanted to do something with some improvisers, and we were talking, and I was saying that it'd be really great if we could do something that fights against what we're seeing in all of the Zoom shows. So this was maybe 2 or 3 months after people had been doing Zoom shows, and a lot of great improvisers were falling down the same path of congratulating themselves for things that weren't good, doing shows that really weren't worth watching, and they knew it too. I mean, it just, the work wasn't that good. And people doing the same stuff they do on stage, but it not transferring. So that was my original suggestion, is those are the 3 things that we should look at. And Jeff went away and he talked to Keith and asked if Keith would come in and sit with us for a few of the sessions. And then Patty came along, and Steve Jaron from now from Germany, but originally Loose Moose. Yeah, and that's the 4 of us. And we start to explore things and peel away the falseness, peel away the performance side of things, and develop something that was less about being a show and more about being an exploration. We also recognize that 99.9% of the people going to online shows are other improvisers. Really, there's not many normal people going to shows. So why not do something based on the audience that's coming too? And so we thought it's something for us to keep exploring, but also something for the audience who comes to see it, that maybe they can pull some ideas that are useful for them for their own performances. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how it started.
So explaining the format or the thing is that you play the scenes and you comment on them, right?
Yeah, that's really basically it. With the focus on doing work that we think has potential for use on Zoom, trying to correct some of the issues we have on Zoom, like being in this state of looking to a camera. And one of the big ones is, can you make people feel spontaneous? Can you make people light up as a performer? Because generally in your own home, doing ideas that are difficult to hear with each other, mm-hmm. you don't feel that same electricity. So those are the things that we're looking at. Yeah.
So what do you find different, similar, or easier in this
Reality.
reality, online Zoom reality?
Yeah. Well, again, coming from the mind, the physical world and visual world, I was really excited by a lot of the potential of what we could do. Is there a way that we can reach into the other person's screen and pull them out? Is there some way of using the camera so we could have you walking around the room and going over to the kitchen and seeing things and hearing it from my perspective? Can we have you become small or have you become big? And that's quite magical if we can do that and change perspective. After our first show, we did one of an exercise from Keith, the small voice scene where you're talking to a small creature. And someone saw it and said, you know, that was the first time I'd seen that exercise. And in comparison to what you did on stage with that exercise, and thinking that's better than the stage version. And so we thought, okay, there's a small success there because it's inspired people to see the work differently. Like we can do something better here than we could actually do on stage.
I agree, because I thought the same.
Well,
I love this exercise, but that was really sweet because you could see the perspective and the small character which wasn't there, but just small voice was really sweet.
well, and again, like back to your narrative idea about going into your head, what we're doing here in this new Zoom reality is we're really pushing ourselves into our head. It's all very intellectual, but we need to practice with it. So even with that exercise, we did quite a lot of work visually on like, how can I make this creature look like it's a creature? So sometimes you'd pick it up, but you'd put your finger right in front of the camera,
Mm-hmm.
and you would look like you're sitting on the fingers. I move you around, and then I'd put you on a flower. Like, oh, how are you doing there? And you'd feel small because you're on the flower. So you had to, I think, learn some of the tricks before you did it. Even the idea of putting a camera down on the ground. I mean, it's a simple thing, but people don't normally think about doing that, and they're not set up to do it. So it takes them a lot of intellectual power just to move the cameras around. So we've got to get over the work we have to do before we can do the inspired work that's possible.
So is anything from online work which inspired you to the future stage work, something you will get from this which you can bring on stage?
Less about the practical things. I can't think of too many of the like games and things, because some of the games, like there's a game that I came up with just called In and Out, where if you're speaking, you have to move in, and if you're not speaking, you move out, and you have to constantly readjust because people are throwing their faces in and you have to be out. So it's a nice physical thing, but it doesn't work on stage. It's nice to have some of those things now that are working on Zoom, but won't work on stage. I don't think I have a lot that technically I'm inspired to bring on stage, but theory, I have a lot. Like the idea I said at the beginning of our talk, that you're not improvising. That you people on stage who are doing your clever, safe stuff, you're not improvising if you're doing something you've done before, because it's easy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I'm going to bring a lot more of that, breaking people's safety zones a little bit more. I did it quite a lot before. I mean, I'm always very frustrated with older improvisers who have been doing it for more than 10, 15, 20 years. And they're all mentally dying. And it's the same old thing. Or, hey, I'm doing my clever shtick again. And I don't want to watch any of them. I don't perform with loose moose improvisers very much, or the older loose moose improvisers, because they're doing the same stuff they did 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. I love performing with 15-year-olds, the 20-year-olds in that range. because they make mistakes that inspire you. And yeah, and that's kind of why I'm in this, is I want to be inspired in all the work that I do.
What's the funniest mistake somebody did and you used that in funny way?
Oh, so many. I mean, telephones ringing are great inspiration for me. You're on stage, telephone rings, and most people will try to ignore it, or they might say, "Oh, someone's calling," and pick up a mime phone. The best thing to do is you know where the phone call came from. Get out into the audience and get that phone. Taking the phone from a person where the other person's on the line and going, "Hello?" And then having a conversation with that person on stage and using that in your scene. Oh, that's great. I've done that quite a few times. I remember one time, it was actually an improvised show outside. Telephone rang, and it was the husband, well, the fiance of the woman who was on stage with us. And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. I'll go." I go, "No, no, no. Why are we calling? I just need to ask her about something for our wedding." And I went, "What? Your wedding? Well, why are you delaying it? Let's do it right now." And so we set up the wedding on stage with the woman. And I said, "I'm sorry, we don't have someone who looks like, what do you look like?" And he says, "I've got a blue shirt." And I looked around, and the only person with a blue shirt was this like 9-year-old boy. And so I said, "Come here, kid, come here." And so we used those two, and the woman and this 9-year-old boy got married through the phone to this guy. It was a very strange and odd scene, but everybody in the audience was just giggling and laughing. So those kinds of things. There's been a lot of situations where the audience member causes the inspiration. A woman in Berlin had something under her chair, and I said, "Hey, what do you got there? Is that dangerous?" And she goes, "It's my violin. I just came from class." I go, "Oh." And so I let that sit in my brain. And then later in the scene, I said something like, "Yeah, I think Tracy's upstairs practicing her violin." And I looked out to the audience. I said, "I think she's practicing her violin right now." And I just kept staring at her until she opened up her violin, took it out, and started playing. And it was so beautiful in the scene. So those kinds of things have always inspired me, when the audience member becomes the hero in the scene.
Mm-hmm. So as we talked, you've been to so many countries. You're traveling a lot. You said like 9 months a year, which is pretty a lot. 50 countries. We already started to talk about how different it is. So how would you see Canadians, Americans, Europeans, Asians as a improvisers? What's for you significant in each of this group?
It's a funny thing. Like we're in a reality now where political correctness makes it difficult for us to talk about other people who we aren't. So if I offend anyone, know that I do it with love, and I'm easily wrong because I'm a old white guy, and my opinion doesn't matter. I actually don't have a strong sense of Canadian improvisers because our country is so spread out, and I almost never interact with a Canadian improviser unless I'm in Calgary or I'm in Europe, and there's tons of Canadian improvisers traveling around there. Generally, I think Canada is a very spread up nation of improvisation. So on the west side, you have a very Johnstonian approach. On the east side, you have Ligue d'Improvisation, the League, which is spread out mostly in the French and Italian speaking parts of the world, and Spanish. In the States, again, generalization, because there's so many different pockets of how everybody's performing. I, like many other people, have this idea that Americans are, "Hey, how's it going?" That big over the top kind of thing. We'll go south, going down to Latin America. Again, all of the different countries have subtle differences, but much more physical, especially if you get into places like Colombia, where clown work, and Brazil, where clown work is more dominant. There's a stronger emotional connection, really beautiful as soon as you meet someone on stage or in real life, you think, I've known these people for years because they're so passionate, so connected. In many places in Latin America, I find that there's more of a political side because they're living through more difficult political situations. And I think some of the North American and European improvisers who are saying, we shouldn't put anything political on stage. We shouldn't have a difference of opinion with what everybody else thinks. That's bullshit. I think you're in a position of power on stage, and to use that in an elegant, honest way, I think is really important. If I have a different opinion than you on stage, I think we should both state it. And then we're going to have something that reflects life, because life is in conflict. The Americans with themselves, the Republicans and Democrats, just everybody is in a state of conflict. So why can't we use this on stage and maybe find some way of dealing with it in an honest way? Mm-hmm. They used to do that all the time with theater. So we're becoming very lazy in our political correct world. Be racist, be sexist, and then deal with it in a way that you think society should deal with it. Mm-hmm. If someone says something horrible about a woman on stage and you stop the scene saying, no, that's not what we believe in at all, that's a bit of a lazy, political correct bullshit way of dealing with it. Let the person be sexist. And then if your opinion is it's wrong, be a strong character, stand up and push up against it. And then you may have something that the audience can aspire to. So move away from there and into Africa. And I haven't spent a lot of time in Africa, but where I have, I find that Africans are, for the most part, still have an African sensibility, still have their own cultural sensibility about improvisation. There are less Europeans and Americans who have gone over there to say, here's how you improvise. And so they're doing it their way, but it's not so formalized. You don't see much improvisation going on. Mm-hmm. And I would just encourage them, be really strong and keep doing what you've done historically and push improvisation to its natural growth. Don't just pull out the books that everybody else is reading and saying, let's just do it their way.
Where in Africa you've been? Which places?
Lots of South Africa, and then Botswana, and over there.
Namibia?
Yeah. And I was at the university in Botswana, and one of the teachers said, I don't know anything about improvisation, but I'm teaching it. And I went, that's fantastic. That's exactly what you should do. The problem is she was teaching it like she needed to know. She was teaching it like she had to have answers. And so she was starting to take YouTube videos, which I think is a mistake. And I worked with some of her students, and the students were brilliant, and she should be learning from her students. So that's one of those things where I think it's already in the culture really strongly. I mean, the historical idea where from Africa, there's so much verbal information passed on that lends itself to improvisation, the storytelling. Mm-hmm. So yeah, moving up to Europe, I think most countries I've been to, maybe less on the east side. I don't think I've been anywhere in Russia. But yeah, each country is so different. That's the fantastic thing, to go to Europe and hit every country and have your brain warped by sometimes the strictness of Germans, the openness and the comedy of England that sometimes gets in the way of their connection with each other. The French poetic quality, the Norwegians, I just want to point out, Scandinavia is an entirely different region. Norway is one of the best countries in the world for improvisation, and most people don't know that. De Andre Theater in Oslo has a really great sense about it. Niels Petter started it up, and I was in discussions with him really early on before There's even the beginning of the Andre Theater. And one of the discussions that came up was, if you're not having a good time, stop it. And that became a real grounded theory of their theater. They sat around with all the core members and they said, seriously, if we're not having a good time, let's just throw it away. We can always go do something else. And sure enough, over the years, they kept that attitude. It's always a fun place to go into. They've got, I don't know, 300 volunteers, all wanting to improvise. They've become so successful selling out the theater, they've had to have another theater beside it, which they bought. And so they do 2 shows sometimes at the same time against each other, always exploring new ideas. And again, it goes back to the core ideas. They're healthy in how they think about it, and they're always questioning, is this what we want to do? Is this feeding back in a way that makes us healthy as improvisers, artists, and people? So I think that's something I really like. And I love the accent. This is a very good thing we're doing. I love to improvise. Oh, it's great. It's brilliant. It's so positive. Finnish improvisation is unemotional, mostly. I am very happy. It's good to be here. But also some of my favorite improvisers are there. And I love the people in Finland. Mm-hmm. I mean, I could go on and on. It's like every country is so unique. It has the qualities that come out from the personalities. And most of the time when I go to a country, I'll ask them, what stereotypes do you know about yourselves? So that I don't come across right away judging them as this stupid Canadian, but they tell me, and I go, oh, sometimes we're lazy. Oh, sometimes we're loud. Sometimes, and then you look at their improvisation, and sure enough, there are cultures coming out through their work. And you have to be careful in saying it's not a mistake. It's just, you have such a strong emphasis over here. Let's try to build something over here to keep a balance.
So what is the country or place or the city where you haven't been yet, but you would like to go to teach improv?
I don't want to go anywhere else. When I was younger, I used to think, I'm going to collect every city in the world. I could do this. This is easy. And then I start realizing there are a lot of cities, and it becomes a bit superficial. It's like I meet really great people in every city, and I was working it out, and I thought, if I stay in touch with all these people that I like, I would have to talk to someone every minute, a different person every minute of the year to stay in touch with everyone. So you start losing the connections, the really close connections that you want, and people start writing you notes that you go, I'd love to get more in depth with it, but I can only have a superficial conversation with you. So in a way, I'd rather not travel and feel bad about that. I love Iceland. I worked at the National Theatre teaching improvisation, but I didn't work with the improvisers. I worked with the National Theatre employees. And that was just, the country is beautiful. It's one of my favorite countries. I wouldn't mind going to Borneo, but that's not because of improvisers, because I like orangutans and I want to go visit the animals there. Yeah, I never was a traveler. I never wanted to travel. I love people. I love how the brains work. And when like in Peru, I hang out with these young improvisers. They don't want to take me to any of the special places in Peru, in Lima. They want to hang out with me, and I go hang out at people's houses and at the small clubs where the locals are, and watch old people dance with each other. And I'm thinking, that's Peru, that's Lima. Mm-hmm. Going to another place where they say, and this old building was built in 1207, and that's not the country. So it's the people anywhere.
Mm-hmm. There are formats like playback and how it was. Am I correct?
The life game, and that was how it was was something that kind of was before the live game.
Okay. So these are formats which are like made by Lusmus or by you.
So all kinds of different ones. So what was the first one you said?
There was playback is playback and how it was.
Yeah, so playback, of course, is an American format. Another, there's some formats that are licensed, and I think playback is a licensed format. The life game, which is Keith's interview format, is a licensed format, and one that he's really cautious about letting people play with. It's a very difficult format. I remember in the format, you interview someone about their life, and then you do scenes that honor that person's life. But most people get it wrong when they do it, so he doesn't license it to many people. There's one scene where someone was being interviewed and talked about trying to kill themselves. And so that's a really heavy thing. You have directors who are trying to help the scenes come out from that. And you never want to direct what's already been talked about, because the imagination of the audience is so much better than anything we can do. So we have to find something different artistically. The directors generally in that situation will run away from it, change topics, and go somewhere safe. That's a real big mistake for improvisers. Keith was directing, and it was a really great opportunity to watch what he would do. And he said, I need 2 people on stage. All right, Frank, I want you to be the heart. Can you be a heart? Very good. Patty, I want you to be the bullet. And so the guy in the interview said, the bullet is still in my heart 2 millimeters away. They couldn't take it out. And so this scene between the bullet and the heart was amazing. I'm so close, I could just, and the heart was like, why do you want to kill me? Oh, I need to be close to you. It was really amazing. So yeah, most directors would have a hard time going there. And also the sensitivity to the person being interviewed. Are you doing things that are hurting them in some way? Keith was always saying this should not be psychology or therapy. We know it's therapeutic, but we don't want to pretend that we're therapists, because we really are not. And people who have mental issues should go to people who are professionals and know how to deal with things. Us performers get into a lot of trouble doing that. Bay Area theater sports, I think William has a really good phrase. It's called emotional prostitution. I can take an emotional story from you and I can get a laugh from it or a story from it, and it's cheap. So we're not therapists. Be very careful. So those formats that you've mentioned have the element of truth and audience stories being brought out. One was created at Loose Moose, the other one was down the States. I've got a few formats as well, because I went through a phase of thinking this is exactly what I want to do, is go into the stories of other people. One was the shell game. So 2 people tell stories. One of them is always going to tell the truth. One of them is always going to lie, but the audience doesn't know which one it is. And so we do scenes based on these lives. And then the audience gets to vote whose life was true and whose life was false. It trains the liar improviser to tell stories that are so believable that it must be true. And it tells the truth teller, can you find the edge of your truth that seems unbelievable? Because you're always trying to get the audience to get it wrong. And it was a really good training technique. Again, I was trying to train people to push themselves to the edge and not be too weird. So the liars lie, yes, but bring it to some truth. And then recently, the 2019, something called overlap. And in overlap, it was the idea of an audience comes in and you're going to be really connected to someone in that audience, or 2 or 3 people. So in the process of the game, you ask questions, you play certain games that are designed to find out who in the audience you connect with. And then you might do a scene with them, or you might pull up more information and do more scenes, or you're really connected. That person comes down on stage and just you and that person have a conversation, and we do scenes based on those lives. The stories were so so connecting and so warm. They were always really successful, but I haven't had a chance to develop it further because pandemic.
Oh, I'm sorry for that.
That's all right.
Yeah, but I hope you will come back to it, and I'm sure you will.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is I think there's a billion ideas out there. So I've had a few people come up to me and say, "Oh, well, I've just done this format, blah 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 blah." And I go, "Oh, that sounds great." And then they look at me and go, but you invented it." And I go, "What? Really?" So I create a lot of formats that I forget, uh, because I think it's really easy as long as you follow the idea that you're trying to solve the problem of the performers that you're with, stay connected to the audience, create an arc of a show that makes people more excited at the end than they were at the beginning, and then your format should be okay.
Mhm.
People who get too intense about their formats and they don't want anybody to change it, I think there's a big problem with that. Luckily, I have a bad memory, so I don't know what I've created and what I haven't.
Yeah, they morph during the process, and getting more into the people. Oh, that's great to know. Maybe I will come back to you privately to talk about formats.
Wow, okay.
But one of the last big things I want to ask you, you do pretty a lot, I think, applied improv. Am I right?
Yeah, I do a lot of balance of stuff. I think I'm a very um, needy improviser, needy human being, that I get very bored if I stay in one thing too long. So if I've been just working with straight improvisers, it gets boring. So I start working with 5-year-old children and I'm excited again. I stay there too long and I want to just kill myself. And so I go to toy experts and play with them, and then doctors and military or whoever.
So I wanted to ask you, because I've heard like you were working with psychologists and military. What kind of things you teach these people? What's the difference between psychologists and military people? What kind of how you found the way to military? Like what was the thing you taught them?
It's, I think, again, it goes to us as human beings who are born improvisers. And we know on stage, if we use all the theory correctly, our scenes just open up into amazing possibilities. Same thing happens in life. So I'll be doing a class, for example, in Israel. I was doing a class in Jerusalem, teaching the class, and then I start throwing in some of the theories that I like about improvisation and about connectivity. And then during the intermission, a guy comes up to me and goes, "Hi, so I'm a scientist and I'm working on an experiment right now, and something you said kind of connected to me." And right away, we jumped into this conversation about connection and improvisation. And luckily, in my brain, I had a couple exercises that I thought would work for him in his laboratory. And I said, "Okay, second half of the class, don't tell anybody. I'm going to devote it to you, and most of the exercises will be for you." All of the exercises related to everyone else, but he was really inspired by what we did. And then after the class, he said, "I have to go back to the laboratory now and rework what I've been doing, because now it doesn't make sense. These new ideas have changed everything." And so then he brought me into the laboratory and we did some work there. So that's the approach of how I end up working, like in a laboratory or with the military. Two different militaries, in Norway and in England. There's one in Canada. I can't talk about that. The the one in England, I was actually doing a business conference, uh, and I noticed there was a few people in the audience with military uniforms, and they were the most interested in some of the theories that were coming out for the improvisation. And after they talked to me about some of the stuff that I'd mentioned, so I think that's how it kind of comes about. You make sparks for people. They make the relationship to their own work, you talk to them, you find out what they're working on, that sparks your idea in improvisation, and you start making these collaborations. I have a long-term collaboration with a guy in Newcastle, England, a psychologist, and he brought me into work with systemic family therapists. And it's basically a therapy where you have a group of therapists all listening to a family talking, and they reflect how they heard. I hear the father saying this. I heard the mother saying this. And then the family listens to that and they kind of hear how they are from the outside, and it's supposed to help them. So we did the session and I had them improvise how they work. And then I basically gave feedback like you might after a show, thinking I'm going to offend these people because I'm basically telling them, I think some of the theories that you're using are really bad. One of the theories, for example, was everybody affects everyone else. We know that on stage. Someone off on the side, being the passenger in the scene, is affected by the argument that goes on between two people over there. How their eyes move to look at them or not look at them changes how the scene works. And so I told them this, and I said, you sitting there as therapists trying to remain impartial and outside is affecting the family in a big way. And they said, but we're keeping our eyes down. We're not doing anything. I go, exactly. Can you imagine if you're with someone in a room and they look away from you and they look down like this? What's the emotional impact it has on you? And they went, oh, of course. So it's normal things that we know, like in status work, again, one of Keith's big things, we know the status play between people has a strong impact. And to tell them this, to reflect back on their work, they all saw that and were changed by it. Mm-hmm. I was just working a couple days ago with a guy who's teaching for the first time some design engineers in the United States. He came to me with a list of games and he said, this is what I'm thinking of doing, games. And I said, well, it's again a dangerous thing to do these games, whoosh and that kind of stuff, because you're going into a community that aren't improvisers and they think it's flaky, weird kind of stuff. So why go into it on that side? Why don't you get to know them first? Approach them from their reality, make them feel safe, and then be inspired by them and put the exercises to the ones they need, to what they need. And that's for all of you applied improvisers out there doing the work. Stop doing clever things that have small impacts and be the student of the people you're teaching. Listen to them, figure out who they are, and then put what you know towards making them stronger or better or aiding them. Don't make yourself look good.
Mm-hmm. So what is your, if it's a good question, I don't know, what's your biggest success in teaching non-improvisers, because we as improvisers we have an aim like doing good scenes and maybe narrative, being spontaneous, whatever it is. Did you experience some kind of big thing which really made you happy and fulfilled as a teacher of non-improvisers?
Yeah, a lot of times. I mean, some of them are really small, like me and my friend's daughter, and I taught her how you can make friends with a fly. When I was a kid, I learned that if you put your finger close to a fly, they'll start to test you to see if you're danger or not. And they'll touch you and go away, touch you and go away. Sometimes they fly away and they come back to the same spot. And eventually they'll climb onto your finger and they'll go from finger to finger. And I forgot about it. Weeks later, she came up to me with a fly. I went, well, I'd forgotten I'd even talked to her about it. She goes, look. I go, how'd you learn to do that? And she goes, you taught me. And I went, oh, that's brilliant. So those little things I like. Another success, actually another kid story was, and this happens a lot, kids tend to look at me like one of them, like I'm a kid as well. And one kid had alcohol fetal syndrome. He was in the class, and with alcohol fetal syndrome, the kids are sometimes out of control, walking on the desks of other kids and very loud. And most of the kids in the class were quite angry. And he was away one day, and so we had this long conversation, a great improvisational conversation, and we developed some techniques. And then he came back the next day. Everything had changed. They were really positive towards him, and by the end, he wrote me a little note saying he wished I was his father.
Oh,
And I went, oh, so that kind of stuff makes a difference.
oh, that's
Yeah.
really sweet.
Oh, here's a controversial one that I love, but it could have gone horribly wrong. I was in a class teaching improvisation, and when you say, can I have a volunteer, especially with young kids, often the young boys will come rushing up and pushing the little girls beside them. And this one kid was always doing that. And I had to stop them. And he was a bit of a bully. And I opened the conversation again, improvisationally, to say about status, about who controls who and who's the bully in the class. And everybody kind of nodded to this guy. And I said, could you come up? And so he stood beside me. And I said, who's the smallest person in the room? And this little tiny girl put up her hand, and they stood beside each other. And it was a very big difference in their height. And I said, okay, can you, to the bully, can you hit her as hard as you can? Now, as an improviser, I didn't do that because I knew he would say yes, and I knew it because he's a good storyteller. He knows that this is wrong, not just because a teacher told him, but because just to hit someone who is weaker than you makes you look like a jerk. And all the kids looked at him, looked at me, looked at their teacher, and there's a tension. And he said, no. I said, why not? He says, it's because it's wrong. Why? So he started the storytelling process and telling me why. And I go, exactly right. It's a very good story, one that you should live by. And you should never trust what's on commercials on television. You should never trust adults who are telling you to do shit. Never trust friends who are telling you it's cool to be the bully. You know better. You know innately what the story is. And from that day on, he was the little girl's protector.
Oh,
So it's that kind of stuff that I go, real life improvisation is so useful.
oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah, but I don't think too many teachers would have allowed that to go on. I had a good teacher who was willing to trust that it would have been turned out okay.
So you touched the subject I wanted to ask you, or you already said, because you said that my question was how improvisation can improve life. And you just said that this is one of the ways, and that's a beautiful story. So how improvisation improved your life?
Of course, I don't know because I haven't been anything but an improviser,
Yeah.
really. I mean, I live a charmed life. I can spin the globe, put my finger on it and say, I'm going to go there. And there'll always be someone who wants to learn improvisation. If there's not an improvisation group, there's a university, there's a medical team, there's someone who wants to learn or someone who will benefit from improvisation. So I can go anywhere, I can do anything. I'm lucky to be a Canadian in the situation I'm in. I mean, I feel embarrassed sometimes to say that improvisation and my reality has really given me everything that I ever want.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing, like with all things in life, all good things in life, there's negative stuff. So you don't have a good long-term relationship when you are constantly traveling and constantly out there. It's hard to live in the world that everyone else lives in when you're constantly in this, everything's going to be okay. And most people are going, I don't have enough money for food. I can't live my life. So sometimes you feel like you're separate from the world. Sometimes you go, I don't have a family or relationship because I keep going to all these different places. But again, as an improviser, like what we said earlier about the defense mechanisms, you have to recognize the shit that you do, even if it comes from a good place, and then alter it so that you can find balance. And that's always what I'm trying to look for.
Mm-hmm. I will change the subject a little bit. There is a book called Free Play. Why do you love that book?
Well, I don't love it. I'm not going to marry it. But I met Steve Nachmanovich a long time ago, and I liked them. I also like the idea that it was improvisation coming from another world. And I think that's what I connected to because there's too many improvisers who are, it's kind of incestuous. I'm an improviser teaching improvisation to improvisers and performing for improvisers. And it doesn't really reach out to others.
Mhm.
So I think that was one thing that I connected to. Where did you see that I loved it?
Oh, I know, I know it from somewhere. But yeah, he also, as an artist, he also was looking for improvisation in many fields, and in his books, he also mentioned Keith Johnston a few times. So he's familiar with work of Keith as well and other people who improvised. So I think it's really interesting, and yeah, just wanted to
Yeah.
ask you. And I didn't know that you met him, and now I know that.
Yeah. I again, I think that if you meet someone and you like them, you're probably going to like their work.
Mhm.
It's like that idea we talked about, the who are the good improvisers, the nice improvisers you like, and generally they're nice people, they're good people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so two last questions I have for you. One is, if you had a chance to give just one advice to improviser, what would that be?
Ooh.
Oh,
Um, uh, don't don't trust the politicians. I okay, I can't. I come from a world like my mother and father were divorced when I was 4, and so I didn't have an authority over top of me saying, "You got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do this." And often people would say, "Do you miss not having a father? Do you think your life would have been different?" Yeah, it would have been different, but not having the authority, I think, created a great feeling of exploration, that anything is possible, a lot of experiences of trying things and getting it wrong and not feeling bad about it, but trying it again and exploring it and making it better. So I would say trust what's truly you first. Explore that first, and then listen to what a teacher might say to you. You'll never be able to go back to an original state of a child because already society's kind of fucked you up in a way. And so you have to start thinking, how am I missing out on what's naturally me? But you can do things like, if you're just finishing school, maybe don't go into the next year of school. Maybe go explore a country that's different from you and see what life is, and stop hearing it secondhand intellectually from someone else.
mhm.
So, yeah, become a better person before you become an improviser.
Ah, great. And the very, very last question is, when was the last time, or what did you do? What was the last time when you did something for the first time?
Recently. Yeah, I forget things so quickly. And I know there was something really just recently that I did. Oh, I have such a bad memory. I'll try to maybe not think about the most recent one because I've forgotten it for now.
Or maybe it comes when you start to talk about something else.
Yeah, I used I used to be so quick at jumping into things that I'd never done before, and really enjoying them. Now I hate them a lot. I hate doing new things, and I know that's me. That's bad side of me. Uh, I took a year off of traveling in 2019, just before the pandemic, and I'm very bad with strict things like doing woodworking and making sure everything is the right size before you hammer it all together. So I decided I'm going to build a bookshelf. And for those people who have seen pictures of me doing Zoom classes, often I have my bookshelf behind me that I created, and it's got a secret door in it. Not so secret because I tell everybody that you can go inside it. And what happened was, before I was building it, I had to fix the roof. And as I was fixing the roof, I found that there were holes in the roof, bad holes, and the electricity was wrong. And then I had to dig away the floor. And it was one thing after the other, and I tried to do it all myself. And so that was like learning how to do drywalling and construction and that kind of stuff. That was a lot of new for the first time. And some of it was okay, but I hated it.
And huge, a lot of things, and quite difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a problem of taking on epic tasks and then just hating myself.
Shawn, this is the end of our talk, our almost 2 hours talk. So yeah, wow, went so
Wow.
quickly. Thank you so much. It was so fun and great. And finally, after a few years knowing you, I know you much better.
Yeah, and it was nice having an interview with you. There's things that you do that I think is very good as an interviewer, because I can hear you listening to me, whereas a lot of interviewers are just moving on to what they need to do. So you had this structure. I could hear some questions coming out that you want to ask, but also I could hear you following up. So it was a good interview.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. That was really nice time, and I'm really glad that I could get to know more about you, and a lot of things I hope will be interesting for our listeners.
Viewers?
Hmm?
Listeners.
Listeners, viewers,
Viewers. Yeah.
also viewers. This is a better for me as a podcast than podcast, because you can see the face and be connected more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Wow, this is it. Oh.